Well, hey everybody, we got another lesson for you in our series called Undefeated, and we're looking at Jesus and Easter. And last week we covered how God, because Jesus died and rose again, that we don't have to be separated from God. We don't have to be quarantined from God anymore. And this week we're going to look at kind of how God did that a little bit deeper with Jesus. So here's the thing. We have phrases like, Jesus defeats my sin. And we know, all of us know the story of the cross, the gospel, that Jesus came and he lived a perfect life and then he died on a cross for our sins and rose again. And we look at that and we say, Jesus defeated my sin. But most of us don't look any deeper than just Jesus died on the cross for my sin. I mean, what does it mean that Jesus died for my sin? Here's the thing. How does anyone getting beat up by a whole bunch of Roman soldiers save anybody? I mean, if you all got together and beat me up and killed me, that's not going to save anybody. It just means I die. So how is it that Jesus' death on the cross saves us? I mean, some people will say, well, Jesus died on the cross to show how much he loves us. And that's true. But golly, couldn't he have done it a different way? Like, big flowers or something? Like, how does Jesus dying on a cross, beat up by a whole bunch of Romans, save us? Well, here's where I want to look. We looked at this passage a few weeks ago, actually, as we looked at Jesus and our fears. Matthew 26. So this is what's happening before Jesus goes to the cross. And this is how I think we're going to try to answer the question, how does Jesus' dying save us and mean that sin is defeated? Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me. And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. So Jesus asks God the Father to let this cup pass from him. What cup? And what's in the cup, for that matter? What's he talking about? Now, some people would say that, well, the cup is the cross, the Roman cross, the nails. He doesn't want to go towards that. He doesn't want to experience the crucifixion. But what's weird about that answer is that most of the disciples, after Jesus dies, eventually go to their own crosses, their own deaths. And what happened with them is that they went to their crosses joyfully. So why is Jesus sorrowful? If Jesus, who is the most perfect person, if he is the most holy person, the person that we're supposed to imitate, how is it that his disciples go joyfully to their crosses and Jesus goes sorrowfully to his? If it's just about the cross, if the cup is just about the cross. I don't think that the cup is just about the cross. You see, in the Old Testament and then in Revelation, there's this idea of a cup of God's wrath. So what's in the cup is God's anger and punishment towards sin. So what's going on is not that Jesus is simply physically going to a cross to die. That's like the physical expression of the reality that's going on spiritually, that he's being ripped apart spiritually. Because what's going on is he's going to the cross to suffer the punishment, the separation from God that you and I deserve. We all deserve to be separated from God, punished by God, under his wrath because of the ways that we've sinned against him, because we've committed crimes against the holy God who loves us and only desires good for us. We deserve punishment because he's a good judge. But what Jesus does is he comes and he dies on that cross and he drinks down the cup of the wrath of God and he turns it over and not a drop falls out and he says, "It is finished." So that's the first way that Jesus dies for our sin and defeats our sin, is that the consequences for our sin, which is the punishment and separation from God, those are taken care of. Those are not ever going to come back. If you've put your faith in Jesus Christ, there is no punishment for you that's left. Jesus has drank all of the wrath of God and defeated the consequences of your sin. But then there's another aspect of how Jesus defeats our sin, and that is that he defeats the power and the bondage of sin. So the first is that the consequences of our sin, the punishment and the separation from God, that's dealt with. We don't have to worry about that anymore. But then also the power that sin had on us to just keep doing sin all the time, that is broken. The chains of sin are broken so that we're not enslaved to sin anymore. In fact, we have a new master, and his name is Jesus, who desires only good for us. In John 8, Jesus says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Well, what's the truth that sets us free from the power of sin and darkness? Jesus, his gospel, the person of Jesus. He's the one who sets us free from the power of sin in our lives, so that we don't have to live and obey the desires of our heart for sin anymore. So these are the two ways that I see in the Bible, in the New Testament. You might see more ways, and you should probably discuss it, whether you're meeting in your small group or with your parents. But the two ways that I see that Jesus defeats our sin is that he breaks the power of sin in our lives so that we aren't enslaved to sin anymore, and the consequences and punishment for our sin has been taken care of on the cross so that we can be with God forever. Thanks, guys. Have a great week.